Good evening, and welcome to Garrison Players Readers Theater. This is our third Readers Theater. For Christmas time, a very CoVid Christmas, featuring a number of readings of holiday favorites and at least one or two new entries. And we also wish to thank our sponsor, Canada Bank Savings, who helped make this possible. And so we begin this evening with a reading of Why the Chimes Rang by Raymond MacDonald Alden, read by Paul Barton.
There was once in a faraway country where few people have ever traveled, a wonderful church. It stood on a high hill in the midst of a great city. And every Sunday, as well as on sacred days like Christmas, thousands of people climbed the hill to its great archways, looking like lines of ants all moving in the same direction. When you came to the building itself, you found stone columns and dark passages, and a grand entrance leading to the main room of the church. This room was so long that one standing at the doorway could scarcely see to the other end, where the choir stood by the marble altar. In the farthest corner was the organ, and this organ was so loud that sometimes when it played, people from miles around would close their shutters and prepare for a great thunderstorm. Altogether, no such church as this was ever seen before, especially when it was lighted up for some festival and crowded with people, young and old. But the strangest thing about the whole building was the wonderful chime of bells. At one corner of the church was a great gray tower with ivy growing over it as far up as one could see. I say as far as one could see because the tower was quite great enough to fit the great church, and it rose so far into the sky that it was only in very fair weather that anyone claimed to be able to see the top. And even then, one could not be certain that it was in sight. Up, up, and up climbed the stones and the ivy, and as the men who built the church had been dead for hundreds of years, everyone had forgotten how high the tower was supposed to be. Now all the people knew that at the top of the tower was a chime of Christmas bells. They had hung there ever since the church had been built and were the most beautiful bells in the world. Some thought it was because a great musician had cast them and arranged them in their place. Others says it was because of the great height, which would reach up where the air was the clearest and the purest. However, that might be. No one who had ever heard the chimes denied that they were the sweetest in the world. Some described them as sounding like angels far up in the sky. Others as sounding like strange winds singing through the trees. But the fact was, no one had heard them for years and years. There was an old man living not far from the church who said that his mother had spoken of hearing them when she was a little girl. And he was the only one who was sure of as much as that. They were Christmas chimes, you see, and were not meant to be played by men on common days. It was the custom on Christmas Eve for all the people to bring to the church their offerings and lay them before the Christ child. When the greatest and best offering was laid on the altar, there used to come sounding through the music of the choir the Christmas chimes far up in the tower. Some said that the wind rang them. Others that they were so high the angels could set them swinging, but for so many long years they've never been heard. It was said that people had been growing less careful of their gifts for the Christ child, and that no offering was great enough to deserve the music of the chimes. Every Christmas Eve, the rich still crowded to the altar, each one trying to bring some better gift than any other without giving anything that he really wanted for himself. and the church was crowded with those who thought that perhaps the wonderful bells might be heard again. But although the service was splendid and the offerings plenty, only the roar of the wind could be heard far up in the stone tower. Now, a number of miles from the city, in a little country village where nothing could be seen of the great church but glimpses of the tower when the weather was fine, lived a boy named Pedro and his little brother. They knew very little about the Christmas chimes, but they had heard of the service in the church on Christmas Eve and had a secret plan, which they often talked over when by themselves, to go see the beautiful celebration. "Nobody can guess, little brother," said Pedro, "all the fine things there are to see and hear. And I have even heard it said that the Christ child himself comes down to bless the service. What if we could see him?" The day before Christmas was bitterly cold, with a few lonely snowflakes flying in the air and a hard white crust on the ground. Sure enough, Pedro and little brother were able to slip quietly away early in the afternoon. And although the walking was hard in the frosty air, before nightfall, they had trudged so far in hand that they saw the lights of the big city just ahead of them. Indeed, they were about to enter one of the great gates in the wall that surrounded it when they saw something dark in the snow near their path and stepped aside to look at it. It was a poor woman who had fallen just outside the city, too sick and too tired to get in where she might have found shelter. The soft snow made of its drift sort of a pillow for her, and she would soon be so sound asleep in the wintry air that no one would ever wake her again. All this Pedro saw in a moment, and he knelt down beside her and tried to rouse her, even tugging at her arm a little, as though he would have tried to carry her away. He turned her face toward him so that he could rub some of the snow on it. And when he looked at her silently a moment, he stood up again and said, "It's no use, little brother. You'll have to go on alone." "Alone?" cried little brother, "and you not see the Christmas festival?" "No," said Pedro, and he would not keep back a bit of a choking sound in his throat. "See this poor woman? Her face looks like the Madonna in the chapel window, and she'll freeze to death if no one cares for her. Everyone has gone to the church now, but when you come back, you can bring someone to help her. I'll rub her to keep her from freezing and perhaps get her to eat the bun that's left in my pocket." "But I cannot bear to leave you and go on alone," said little brother. "Both of us need not miss the service," said Pedro, "and it had better be I than you. You can easily find your way to the church, and you must see and hear everything twice, little brother, once for you and once for me. I'm sure the Christ child must know how I should love to come with you and worship him. And oh, if you get a chance, little brother, to slip up to the altar without getting in anyone's way, take this little silver piece of mine and lay it down for my offering when no one is looking. Don't forget where you've left me, and forgive me for not going with you." In this way, he hurried little brother off to the city and worked hard to keep back his tears as he heard the crunching footsteps sounding further and further in the way in the twilight. It was pretty hard to lose the music and splendor of the Christmas celebration that he had been planning for so long to see, and spend the time instead in that lonely place in the snow. The great church was a wonderful place that night. Everyone said it had never looked so bright and beautiful before. When the organ played and thousands of people sang, the walls shook with the sound, and little Pedro, outside the city walls, felt the earth tremble around him. At the close of the service came the procession with the offerings to be laid upon the altar. Rich men and great men marched proudly to lay their gifts down for the Christ child. Some brought wonderful jewels, some baskets of gold so heavy that they could scarcely carry them down the aisle. A great writer laid down a book he'd been making for years and years. And last of all walked the king of the country, hoping with all the rest to win for himself the chime of the Christmas bells. There went a great murmur through the church as the people saw the king take from his head the royal crown, all set with precious stones, and lay it gleaming on the altar as his offering to the Holy Child. Surely, everyone said, we shall hear the bells now, for nothing like this has ever happened before. But still, only the cold old wind was heard in the tower, and the people shook their heads. Some of them said, as they had before, that they never really believed the stories of the chimes and doubted if they ever rang at all. The procession was over, and the choir began the closing hymn. Suddenly, the organist stopped playing, and everyone looked at the old minister who was standing by the altar holding up his hand for silence. Not a sound could be heard from anyone in the church, but as all the people strained their ears to listen, there came softly, but distinctly, swinging through the air, the sound of chimes in the tower. So far away, yet so clear the music seemed, so much sweeter were the notes than anything that had ever been heard before, rising and falling away up there in the sky, that the people in the church sat for a moment as still as though someone held each of them by the shoulders. Then they all stood up together and stared straight at the altar to see what great gift had awakened the long silent bells. But all that the nearest of them saw was the childish figure of little brother, who had crept softly down the aisle when no one was looking and had laid Pedro's little piece of silver on the altar.
Thank you. And now we present Christmas on the Prairie by Laura Ingalls Wilder, read by Megan Davenport.
The days were short and cold. The wind whistled sharply, but there was no snow. Cold rains were falling. Day after day, the rain fell, pattering on the roof and pouring from the eaves. Mary and Laura stayed close by the fire, sewing their 9-patch quilt blocks or cutting paper dolls from scraps of and hearing the wet sound of the rain. Every night was so cold that they expected to see snow the next morning. They saw only sad, wet grass. They pressed their noses against the squares of glass in the windows that Pa had made, and they were glad they could see out, but they wished they could see snow. Laura was anxious because Christmas was near and Santa Claus and his reindeer could not travel without snow. Mary was afraid that even if it snowed, Santa Claus could not find them so far away in Indian territory. When they asked Ma about this, she said she didn't know. What day is it? They asked her anxiously. How many more days till Christmas? And they counted off the days on their fingers till there was only one more day left. Rain was still falling that morning. There was not one crack in the gray sky. They felt sure there would be no Christmas. Still, they kept hoping. Just before noon, the light changed. The clouds broke and drifted apart, shining white in a clear blue sky. The sun shone, the birds sang, and thousands of drops of water sparkled on the grasses. But when Ma opened the door to let in the fresh, cold air, they heard the creek roaring. They had not thought about the creek. Now they knew they would have no Christmas because Santa Claus could not cross that roaring creek. Pa came in bringing a big fat turkey. If it weighed less than 20 pounds, he said he'd eat it feathers and all. He asked Laura, how's that for a Christmas dinner? Think you can manage one of those drumsticks? She said yes, she could. Then Mary asked him if the creek was going down, and he said it was still rising. Ma said it was too bad. She hated to think of Mr. Edwards eating his bachelor cooking all alone on Christmas Day. Mr. Edwards had been asked to eat Christmas dinner with them, but Pa shook his head and said a man would risk his neck trying to cross that creek now. No, he said, that current's too strong. We'll just have to make our minds up that Edwards won't be here tomorrow. Of course, that meant that Santa Claus could not come either. Laura and Mary tried not to mind too much. They watched Ma dress the wild turkey, and it was a very fat turkey. Ma said it was too bad that Santa Claus couldn't come this year, but they were such good girls that he hadn't forgotten them. He would surely come next year. Still, they were not happy. After supper that night, they washed their hands and faces, buttoned their flannel nightgowns, tied their nightcap strings and prayers. They lay down in bed and pulled the covers up. It did not seem at all like Christmas time. After a long while, Ma suddenly stood up. "I'm going to hang up your stockings, girls," she said. "Maybe something will happen." Laura's heart jumped, but then she thought again of the creek, and she knew nothing could happen. Ma took one of Mary's clean stockings and one of Laura's, and she hung them from the mantel shelf on either side of the fireplace. Laura and Mary watched her over the edge of their bed covers. "Now go to sleep," Ma said, kissing them goodnight. "Morning will come quicker if you're asleep." She sat down again by the fire, and Laura almost went to sleep. She woke up a little when she heard Pa say, "You've only made it worse, Caroline." And she thought she heard Ma say, "No, Charles, there's the white sugar." But perhaps she was dreaming. Then she heard Jack growl savagely. The door latch rattled and someone said, "Ingalls, Ingalls!" Pa was stirring up the fire, and when he opened the door, Laura saw that it was morning. The outdoors was gray. "Great fish hooks, Edwards! Come in, man! What's happened?" Pa exclaimed. Laura saw the stockings limply dangling, and she scrooged her shut eyes into the pillow. She heard Pa piling wood on the fire, and she heard Mr. Edwards say he had carried his clothes on his head when he swam the creek. His teeth rattled and his voice shivered. He would be all right, he said, as soon as he got warm. "It was too big a risk, Edwards," Pa said. "We're glad you're here, but that was too big a risk for a Christmas dinner." "Your little ones had to have a Christmas," Mr. Edwards replied. "No creek could stop me after I fetched them their gifts from Independence." Laura sat up straight in bed. "Did you see Santa Claus?" she shouted. "I sure did," Mr. Edwards said. "Where? When? What did he look like? What did he say? Did he really give you something for us?" Mary and Laura cried. Wait a minute, Mr. Edwards laughed. And Ma said she would put the presents in the stockings as Santa intended. She said they mustn't look. Mr. Edwards came and sat on the floor by their bed, and he answered every question they asked him. They honestly tried not to look at Ma, and they didn't quite see what she was doing. When he saw the creek rising, Mr. Edwards said he had known Santa Claus could not get across it. "But you crossed it," Laura said. "Yes," Mr. Edwards replied, "but Santa Claus is too old and fat. He couldn't make it where a long, lean razorback like me could do so." And Mr. Edwards reasoned that if Santa Claus couldn't cross the creek, likely he would come no farther south than Independence. Why should he come 40 miles across the prairie only to be turned back? Of course he wouldn't do that. So Mr. Edwards had walked to Independence. "In the rain?" Mary asked. Mr. Edwards said he wore his rubber coat. And there, coming down the street in Independence, he had met Santa Claus. "In the daytime?" Laura asked. She hadn't thought that anyone could see Santa Claus in the daytime. "No," Mr. Edwards said, "it was night, and light was shining out across the street from the saloons." Well, the first thing Santa Claus said was, "Hello, Edwards." "Did he know you?" Mary asked, and Laura asked, "How did you know he was really Santa Claus?" Mr. Edwards said that Santa Claus knew everybody, and he had recognized Santa at once by his whiskers. Santa Claus had the longest, thickest, whitest set of whiskers west of the Mississippi. So Santa Claus said, "Hello, Edwards. When I saw you, you were sleeping on a corn shuck bed in Tennessee. And Mr. Edwards well remembered the little pair of red yarn mittens that Santa Claus had left for him that time. Then Santa Claus said, I understand you're living down now along the Verdigris River. Have you ever met up down yonder with two little girls named Mary and Laura? I surely am acquainted with them, Mr. Edwards replied. It rests heavy on my mind, Santa Claus. They are both of them sweet, pretty, good little young things, and I know they are expecting me. I surely do hate to disappoint two good little girls like them. Yet, with the water up the way it is, I can't ever make it across that creek. I can figure no way whatsoever to get to their cabin this year, Edwards, Santa Claus said. Would you do me the favor to fetch them their gifts this one time? I'll do that, and with pleasure, Mr. Edwards told him. Then Santa Claus and Mr. across the street to the hitching posts where the pack mule was tied. Didn't he have his reindeer? Laura asked. You know he couldn't, Mary said. There isn't any snow. Exactly, said Mr. Edwards. Santa Claus traveled with a pack mule in the Southwest. And Santa Claus uncinched the pack and looked through it, and he took out the presents for Mary and Laura. Oh, what are they? Laura cried. But Mary asked, then what did he do? Then he shook hands with Mr. Edwards, and he swung up on his fine bay horse and tucked his long white whiskers under his bandana. So long, Edwards, he said, and he rode away on the Fort Dodge trail, leading his pack mule and whistling. Laura and Mary were silent an instant, thinking of that. Then Ma said, you may look now, girls. Something was shining bright top of Laura's stocking. She squealed and jumped out of bed. So did Mary, but Laura beat her to the fireplace. And the shining thing was a glittering new tin cup. Mary had one exactly like it. These new tin cups were their very own. Now they each had a cup to drink out of. Laura jumped up and down and shouted and laughed. But Mary stood still and looked with shining eyes at her own tin cup. Then they plunged their hands into the stockings again, and they pulled out two long, long sticks of candy. It was peppermint candy, striped red and white. They looked and looked at that beautiful candy, and Laura licked her stick, just one lick. But Mary was not so greedy. She didn't take even one lick of her stick. Those stockings weren't empty yet. Mary and Laura pulled out two small packages. They unwrapped them, and each found a little heart-shaped cake. Over their delicate brown tops was sprinkled white sugar. The sparkling grains lay like tiny drifts of snow. The cakes were too pretty to eat. Mary and Laura just looked at them, but at last Laura turned hers over, and she nibbled a tiny nibble from underneath where it wouldn't show. And the inside of that little cake was white. Laura and Mary never would have looked in their stockings again. The cups and the cakes and the candy were almost too much. They were too happy to speak. But Ma asked if they were sure the stockings were empty. Then they put their arms down inside them to make sure. And in the very toe of each stocking was a shining, bright new penny. They had never even thought of such a thing as having a penny. Think of having a whole penny for your very own. Think of having a cup and a cake and a stick of candy and a penny. There had never been such a Christmas. Ma said gently, aren't you going to thank Mr. Edwards? Oh, thank you, Mr. Edwards, thank you, they said, and they meant it with all of their hearts. Pa shook Mr. Edwards' hand too and shook it again. Pa and Ma and Mr. Edwards acted as if they were almost crying. Laura didn't know why, so she gazed again at her beautiful presents. She looked up again when Ma gasped, and Mr. Edwards was taking sweet potatoes out of his pockets. He said they had helped to balance the package on his head when he swam across the creek. He thought Pa and Ma might like them with the Christmas turkey. There were 9 sweet potatoes. Mr. Edwards had brought them all the way from town, too. It was just too much. Pa said so. It's too much, Edwards, he said. They could never thank him enough. Mary and Laura were too much excited to eat breakfast. They drank the milk from their shining new cups, but they could not swallow the rabbit stew and the cornmeal mush. Don't make them, Charles, Ma said. It will soon be dinner time. For Christmas dinner, there was the tender, juicy, roasted turkey. There were the sweet potatoes, baked in the ashes and carefully wiped so that you could eat the good skins too. There was a loaf of salt-rising bread made from the last of the white flour. And after all that were stewed dried blackberries and little cakes. But these little cakes were made with brown sugar, and they did not have white sugar sprinkled over their tops. Then Pa and Ma and Mr. Edwards sat by the fire and talked about Christmas times in Tennessee and up north in the big woods. But Mary and Laura looked at their beautiful cakes and played with their pennies and drank water out of their new cups. And little by little, they licked and sucked their sticks of candy till each stick was sharp-pointed on one end. That was a happy Christmas.
That's good. And now, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. Read by Tinker Finley.
Francis P. Church in the New York Sun on September 21st, 1897. We take pleasure in answering thus prominently the communication below, expressing at the same time our great gratification that its faithful author is numbered among the friends of the Sun. Dear editor, I am 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there is no Santa Claus. Papa says, if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? Virginia O'Hanlon. Virginia, your little friends are wrong. They have been affected by the skepticism of a skeptical age. They do not believe except they see. They think that nothing can be which is not comprehensible by their little minds. All minds, Virginia, whether they be men's or children's, are little. In this great universe of ours, man is a mere insect, an ant in his intellect as compared with the boundless world around him, as measured by the intelligence capable of grasping the whole of truth and knowledge. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist, and you know that they abound and give to your life its highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would be the world if there were no Santa Claus. It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. There would be no childlike faith then, no poetry, no romance to make tolerable this existence. We should have no enjoyment except in sense and sight. The eternal light with which childhood fills the world would be extinguished. Not believe in Santa Claus? You might as well not believe in fairies. You might get your papa to hire men to watch in all the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus. But even if you did not see Santa Claus coming down, what would that prove? Nobody sees Santa Claus, but that is no sign that there is no Santa Claus. The most real things in the world are those that neither children nor men can see. Did you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not. But that's no proof that they are not there. Nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders there are, unseen and unseeable in the world. You tear apart the baby's rattle and see what makes the noise inside. But there is a veil covering the unseen world, which not the strongest man, nor even the united strength of all the strongest men that ever lived could tear apart. Only faith, poetry, love, romance can push aside that curtain and view and picture the supernal beauty and glory beyond. Is it all real? Ah, Virginia, in all this world, there is nothing else real and abiding. No Santa Claus. Thank God, he lives and lives forever. 1,000 years from now, Virginia, nay, 10 times 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make glad the heart of childhood.
And now, premiere performance of Spike Slotnik, Private Detective, Christmas Edition, with Ray Dudley as Spike, Kate Collins filling in as Peaches, and Jerry Finley as Jocko. Good evening, and welcome to the further adventures of Spike Slotnik, Private Detective, Christmas Edition. Before we get to our Christmas story, and by way of introduction, allow us to engage in a bit of a flashback. It's 1949. It's summer. And our intrepid hero is hard at work. And so we turn our story over to him.
It was one of those rare evenings in the city. The combination of the dust and the smog and the raw sewage blended together to make that perfume known as New York. New York. A city that'll break your heart, chew you up, spit you out. And if you're not real careful, it'll bust a rib or two. And then, just when you think you've recovered, it'll hit you in the face with a shovel, call it a kiss.
Enough already, you're making me sick.
New York, that special town. In the rain, it makes its own gravy. Off in the distance, solitary saxophone wailed under the 39th Street L, serenading the lonely and the destitute, disturbing the slumber of the roosting pigeons. I was alone that night. Alone, that is, unless you count Peaches. I was never certain if Peaches counted. She sure as hell couldn't type.
Kate, your video's not on.
But what she lacked in intelligence, she more than made up for in feeble-mindedness. I'll say one thing for Peaches. She had moxie. A terrible soft drink, and it made her breath smell.
It's on.
I'd been looking in the classifieds all night. I needed a set of wheels badly. The wayward wife I'd been trailing for a jealous husband all week had suddenly decided to head for Chicago. I'd have spent the money to follow her in a cab, but the rent was due. The landlord seemed to think this building belonged to him. Just because he owned the deed and the title, and his name was carved in stone over the front door. I'd made lots of calls to people with cars for sale, but no luck. Even in this city, it never ceases to amaze me how surly some people can get just because you call them at 3 a.m. One prospect, however, seemed promising. I left a message and was waiting for a call back. In the sound of the woman's voice at the other end, I heard a whisper of a promise that might have been desire. Or it might have been the croup. It had been going around that summer. When the phone rang, I knew my wait was over.
Goldstein and Slotnik, Detective Agency.
That's me, Slotnik, Spike Slotnik. Goldstein wasn't exactly a detective, more like an accordion player. Bar mitzvahs were his specialty. I kept him on mainly because he owned the desk.
Is this the party to whom I am speaking? Yes, ma'am. Just a moment, please. And whom shall I say is calling? It's the lady with the car.
Slotnik. Huh? Uh-huh. Uh-uh. Nope. No dice. I'd rather meet someplace more public. A guy in my business can't be too careful. Someplace wide open. How about Yankee Stadium? Yeah, between second and third base, where Phil Rizzuto plays. Uh-huh. Gotcha.
Oh, Spike, are you sure it's safe?
Safe ain't the name of this game, baby. Never was, never will be.
Promise me you'll play it safe this time. Promise me you won't take nothing that don't have driver's side airbags and anti-lock brakes.
You know that none of those have been invented yet. Besides, baby, save some of that concern for your husband. Remember him? The guy who built that love nest for you on the Upper East Side?
Aw, Spike, honey. You know Fred hasn't been the same ever since that freak accident at the tricycle factory. And a girl like me, she needs something more than a guy that can only slap his fingers on his arm and pull on his ear all day. Sure, he's great at charades, but a girl needs something more.
You know, we could have been good together once, Peaches. We could have made beautiful music. You on the tuba, me on the tambourine. But it wasn't meant to be.
I know, Spike, I know. I've tried to leave Fred so many times, but something keeps pulling me back. Maybe it's love. Maybe it's that 40-foot chain that he's got tied to my ankle. I don't know.
You're right about one thing, though, baby. This could be dangerous. I'd better pack some heat.
They were all out of heat at the drugstore. So here, I got you some Bengay instead.
Thanks, kid. My feet will be killing me by the morning. And I just want you to know, Peaches, I appreciate you looking out for me. You're a sweet kid. Don't ever forget that.
Well, that's our hero. That's our hero. And now let us flash forward to December.
Old Man Winter was settling in here in New York, plunking his big fat keister right in the middle of Manhattan, resting his stinky feet on Staten Island and sneezing all over Jersey. On top of that, business was lousy. Crime was way down. There were fewer missing persons to look for, or wayward husbands to follow. Cripes. For a city as known as the city that never sleeps, it sure does hibernate a lot. Now, don't get me wrong. I love this crazy old town, no matter what season it is. After all, snow, slush, and ice is just nature's cream cheese spread all over the bagel, known as the 5 boroughs. And the occasional murder, well, that's, cream cheese and ketchup, I guess. But Christmas was coming up and fast, and I hadn't figured out yet what to get Peaches or how I was going to pay for it. Now, mind you, Peaches and me, we never, I had too much respect for that ring on her finger. The one she got for winning the Army Nurse Boxing Championship on Okinawa in '46. Plus, she was married to Fred. Fred the Spaz. Now, that's not an insult. It's his name, the Spaz. I think it was Armenian or Dutch. He never asked. And me? Well, I'd been married twice. More about that some other time. Anyway, Peaches was out of the office for a while, probably Christmas shopping for Fred. I knew it was going to take her a while. As always, Fred was fond of hard-to-find gifts. Empty tubes of Ipana toothpaste, the glove compartments, stuffed penguins dressed up like Groucho Marx, that sort of thing. Which left me to hold down the fort, alone. So I shouldn't have been surprised to hear a knock at my office door just as I was heading for the can to read the sports pages. Yeah, it's open. Now this I did not expect. Standing there was a big fat guy with a white beard and a red suit. Not Santa Claus. A guy from the Salvation Army. I figured maybe someone had stolen his collection bucket, needed help finding the scumbag. Yeah? Can I help you? I'm kind of short of cash right now if you're looking for a donation. What came out of his mouth next floored me.
Hiya, son. It's me, Jocko, your dad.
Dad? I'd never recognized him. Well, to be honest, I had no idea what my dad looked like. I didn't really remember him. You see, the only picture I had of him was one I drew with crayons in 3rd grade. I kept it on a frame on my desk in case he ever showed up. So I always expected him to look just like that drawing. Arms of 2 different sizes coming out from his sides instead of his chest. Big sticky outy ears and no nose. What a disappointment.
So, did you miss your old man, Clarence?
First of all, don't use that stupid name you gave me. It's Spike. Spike Slotnik. Didn't you see the sign on the door? Secondly, besides knowing my real name, how do I know you're really my father?
You've got a moon-shaped birthmark on your right cheek.
Ha! There, you're wrong. Look, no birthmark.
Not that cheek.
Oh. Well, how would I know that? I never looked. And I'm not looking now. Some things are better kept under wraps. Or briefs, as it were. I'll take your word for it. So, last I heard, you were doing 8 to 10 up in Sing Sing. What was it? Grand larceny? Embezzlement? Manslaughter?
Playing the accordion within city limits.
Well, you know what they say. Play the accordion, go to jail.
It's the law. Yeah, I know.
Let's get down to brass tacks. What do you want, Dad?
I need your help, son. I'm in a bit of a jam. Someone's trying to kill me.
Don't look at me. I'm not my father's keeper.
But a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush.
Maybe, but a rolling stone gathers no moss.
Please, son. Every cloud has a silver lining, and you can't judge a book by its cover.
Hey, that's no fair. That was 2. Just for that, I get 3 to make up for it. Sorry, Dad, you can't put the cart before the horse because too many cooks spoil the broth when people in glass houses throw stones. We're done. Don't let the door hit you on the butt on the way out. That's 1 for free.
Son, I'm desperate.
After more than 25 years, you waltz in here and want my help? Keep dreaming, old man.
I'll pay you $200 a day plus expenses.
Dad, I've missed you so much. Okay, so what's this about someone trying to kill you? While we're at it, what's with the Salvation Army getup? You've reformed or something?
Nah, it's a kind of disguise. To be honest, I've been casing a fancy shop downtown for a job I'm planning. This is the only way I can watch the joint without arousing any suspicions. But the less you know about that, the better.
Okay. So you stand out in front of a store all day, ringing a bell and collecting donations for the Salvation Army.
Well, not exactly for the Salvation Army, for someone in need, though.
Oh, Dad. Really? It's Christmas time.
How do you think I'm paying you?
Oh, well, all the nickels and quarters, I take it.
Afraid so.
The thought of lifting all that silver made me cringe. My back wasn't so good. You see, I picked up some shrapnel back in 45. Helga Shrapnel, one of the Shrapnel sisters. They were a singing group out of Rotterdam. How was I to know that she was heavier than she looked? But not to worry. These days, Peaches does all the heavy lifting. Okay, back to your problem. Any idea who's trying to kill you or why?
Not a clue.
So how do you know that someone's after you?
They keep leaving threatening notes in my kettle. The last one was the kicker. Gave me the heebie-jeebies so much that I just left my spot and came right here. Here it is, look.
A dozen eggs, loaf of bread, half-gallon of milk. This is a shopping list.
Keep reading.
2 pounds of sugar, half dozen oysters, killed Jocko Slotnik, pound of bacon. God, that is weird.
Exactly.
Can't get oysters this time of year, out of season. Not gonna find those anywhere.
What about the part that says, kill Jocko Slotnik?
Oh. Nah, that's been on my shopping list for years. Wait, come to think of it, this is my shopping list. I recognize the handwriting. It's Peaches. She does all my shopping for me.
Hiya, Spike, honey. I'm back. What a day. I finally found exactly what Fred has been asking for. A Salvation Army kettle filled with cigarette butts. He's going to be ecstatic.
You.
You.
Is it my turn? You! Well, that was fun.
That's my kettle.
You walked away. I saw you. Abandoned property. In New York State General Law, Article 5A, subparagraph 17, subparagraph 4 clearly states, and I quote, finders, keepers.
I wouldn't argue with her, Dad. She's a JD.
Juris Doctorate?
Juvenile delinquent.
Even so, this dame, this Peaches, I knew you were up to something, girlie. She's been hanging around my station every day for the past 3 weeks. I thought she was casing the same pawn shop I was. I didn't know she was after my kettle.
And now it's mine, or rather, Fred's. So, Spike, this is your dad, huh? Doesn't look a thing like his picture.
I know, right?
Must have grown a nose since the last time you saw him.
Yeah.
I just gotta know one thing. Did you put all those notes in my bucket?
Huh? Let me see. Oh, yeah, I was just throwing them away. Your kettle just happened to be on my way downtown.
Hmm.
Fred's love notes.
You mean the ones that say, honey, I'm gonna kill you, and when you least expect it, bang?
Yeah, and the haiku he wrote for our wedding anniversary. Stab, stabby, 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 stab, stab, stabby.
Stabby, stabby, stab. Now I have to admit, Fred's got a way with words.
Gets me every time. Right here.
So you're not after me? You're not planning to kill me?
Oh, honey, if I was gonna do you in, you'd be gone now.
Any chance of me getting my bucket back? I didn't think so. Well, son, it was nice catching up.
I suppose this means no $200 retainer.
Afraid not, kid, but I'll use it to buy you some Christmas presents. The kind like I used to.
Socks and handkerchiefs?
Socks and handkerchiefs. Merry Christmas, son.
Merry Christmas, Dad. Oh, and here.
Oh, this is me, isn't it?
Yep. Drew it myself.
Those were the days before I had a nose. Thank you. I'll treasure it forever. Bye, son. Bye, Peaches.
Bye, Dad.
Bye, Mr. Slotnik. Spike, if he had no nose, how did he smell?
Terrible. Just terrible. Merry Christmas, Peaches.
Merry Christmas, Spike.
Thank you. And now, The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry, as read by Carol Davenport.
$1.87. That was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl. So Della did it, which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look at the home. A furnished flat at $8 per week. It did not exactly beggar description, but it certainly had that word on the lookout for the mendicancy squad. In the vestibule below was a letterbox. Appertaining thereunto was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. The Dillingham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity, when its possessor was being paid $30 per week. Now, when the income was shrunk to $20, though, they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming D. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he was called Jim and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished her cry and attended to her cheeks with a powder rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking a gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months with this result. $20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than they had calculated. Well, they always are. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim. Her Jim. Many a happy hour she'd spent planning for something nice for him, something fine and rare and sterling, something just a little bit near to being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. Suddenly, she whirled from the window and stood before the pier glass. Her eyes were shining brilliantly, but its face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly, she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now there were two possessions of the James Dillingham Youngs in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across the air shaft, Della would have let her hair hang out of the window someday to dry, just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor with all his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed, just to see him pluck at his beard from envy. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee, and it made itself almost a garment for her. And then she did it up again nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a minute and stood still, while a tear or two splashed on the red worn carpet. On went her old brown jacket, on went her old brown hat. With a whirl of skirts and the brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Sofronie, hair goods of all kinds. One flight up Della ran and collected herself panting. Madame, large, too white, chilly, hardly looked the Sofronie. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. Well, I buy hair, said Madame. Take your hat off and let's have a sight at the looks of it. Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practiced hand. Oh, give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hashed metaphor. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. It had surely been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the stores, and she'd turned all of them inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, probably proclaiming its value by substance alone, and not by meretricious ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was even worthy of the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that it must be Jim's. It was like him. Quietness and value. The description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might be properly anxious about the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly, on account of the old leather strap that he used in place of a chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way a little to prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lighted the gas and went to work repairing the ravages made by generosity added to love. which is always a tremendous task, dear friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, long, carefully, and critically. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della doubled the fob chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table near the door that he always entered. Then she heard his step on the stair away down on the first flight, and she turned white for just a moment. She had a habit for saying little silent prayer about the simplest everyday things, and now she whispered, "Oh, please, God, make him think I'm still pretty." The door opened, and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. Poor fellow, he was only 22, and to be burdened with a family. He needed a new overcoat, and he was without gloves. Jim stopped inside the door, as immovable as a setter at the scent of quail. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, not surprise, not disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she'd been prepared for. He simply stared at her fixedly with that peculiar expression on his face. Della wriggled off the table and went for him. "Oh, Jim, darling, don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? Oh, say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you." "You've cut off your hair?" asked Jim laboriously, as if he had not arrived at that patent fact yet, even after the hardest mental labor. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Oh, don't you like me just as well anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I?" Jim looked about the room curiously. "You say your hair is gone?" he said, with an air almost of idiocy. "Well, you needn't look for it," said Della. "It's sold, I tell you, sold and gone, too. Maybe the hairs of my head were numbered," she went on with sudden serious sweetness. "But nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim?" Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He enfolded his Della. For 10 seconds, let us regard with discreet scrutiny some inconsequential object in the other direction. $8 a week or $1 million a year. What is the difference? A mathematician or a wit would give you the wrong answer. Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket. "Don't make any mistake, Dell," he said, "about me. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that could make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me going a while at first." White fingers and nimble tore at the string in the paper, and then an ecstatic scream of joy, and then, alas, a quick feminine change to hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the immediate employment of all the comforting powers of the lord of the flat. For there lay the combs, the set of combs, side and back, that Della had worshipped long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoiseshell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautifully vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers. But the tresses that should have adorned the coveted ornaments were gone. But she hugged them to her bosom, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and say with a smile, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then Della leaped up like a little singed cat and cried, "Oh, oh!" Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly on her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with a reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," he said, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep them a while. They're too nice to use just at present. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. And now, suppose you put the chops on." The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wise ones, possibly bearing the privilege of exchange in case of duplication. And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. Oh, all who give and receive gifts such as they are wisest. Everywhere they are wisest. They are the Magi.
Thank you. And now for our final performance of the evening, Mark Miller reading Horrid Henry's Christmas Play by Francesca Simon.
Only 5 more minutes to home time. Miss Battleaxe droned on about school lunches, blah, 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 homework, blah, 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 the school Christmas play, blah, blah. What? Did Miss Battleaxe say Christmas play? Horrid Henry sat up. "This is a brand new play with singing and dancing," continued Miss Battleaxe. Singing? Dancing? Showing off in front of the whole school? Years ago, when Henry was in the infants class, he'd played 8th sheep in the nativity play and had snatched the baby from the manger and refused to hand him back. Henry hoped Miss Battleaxe wouldn't remember, because Henry had to play the lead. He had to. Who else but Henry could be an all-singing, all-dancing Joseph? "I want to be merry," shouted every girl in the class. "I want to be a wise man," shouted rude Ralph. I want to be a sheep," shouted anxious Andrew. "I want to be Joseph," shouted Horrid Henry. "Quiet!" shrieked Miss Battleaxe. "I'm the director, and my decision about who will act which part is final. I've cast the play as follows. Margaret, you will be Mary." She handed her a thick script. Moody Margaret whooped with joy. All the other girls glared at her. "Susan, front legs of the donkey. Linda, hind legs. Cows. Fiona and Claire, blades of grass. Miss Battleaxe continued assigning parts. Pick me for Joseph, pick me for Joseph, Horrid Henry begged silently. Who else than the best actor in the school to play the starring part? I'm a sheep, I'm a sheep, I'm a beautiful sheep, warbled singing Soraya. I'm a shepherd, beamed Jolly Josh. I'm an angel, trilled Magic Martha. I'm a blade of grass, sobbed Weepy William. Joseph will be played by me, screamed Henry. Peter, said Miss Battleaxe, from Miss Lovely's class. Horrid Henry felt as if he'd been slugged in the stomach. Perfect Peter, his younger brother? Perfect Peter gets the starring part? It's not fair, howled Horrid Henry. Miss Battleaxe glared at him. Henry, you're... Miss Battleaxe consulted her list. Please, not a blade of grass. Please, not a blade of grass, prayed Horrid Henry, shrinking. That would be just like Miss Battleaxe to humiliate him. Anything but that. The innkeeper. The innkeeper. Horrid Henry sat up, beaming. How stupid he'd been. The innkeeper must be the starring part. Henry could see himself now, polishing glasses, throwing darts, pouring big foaming fizzy-whiz drinks to all his happy customers, while singing a song about the joys of innkeeping. Then he'd get into a nice long argument about why there was no room at the inn, and finally the chance to slam the door in Moody Margaret's face after he'd pushed her away. Wow. Miss Battleaxe handed a page to Henry. Your script, she said. Henry was puzzled. Surely there were some pages missing. He read, Joseph knocks. The innkeeper opens the door. Joseph, is there any room at the inn? Innkeeper, no. The innkeeper shuts the door. Horrid Henry turned over the page. It was blank. He held it up to the light. There was no secret writing. That was it. His entire part was one line, one stupid, puny line, not even a line, a word. No. Where was his song? Where was his dance? How could he, Horrid Henry, the best actor in the class, and indeed the world, be given just one word in the school play? Even the donkeys got a song. Worse, after he said his one word, Perfect Peter and Moody Margaret got to yak for hours about mangers and wise men and shepherds and sheep, and then sing a duet, while he, Henry, hung about behind the hay with the blades of grass. It was so unfair. He should be the star of the show, not his stupid worm of a brother. And why on earth was Peter cast as Joseph anyway? He was a terrible actor. He couldn't sing. He just squeaked like a squished toad. And why was Margaret playing Mary? Oh, now she'd never stop bragging and swaggering. Isn't it exciting? Said Mum. Isn't it thrilling? Said Dad. Our little boy, the star of the show. Well done, Peter, said Mum. We're so proud of you, said Dad. Perfect Peter smiled modestly. Well, of course, I'm not really the star. He said, everyone's important, even little parts like the blades of grass and the innkeeper. And then Henry had a brilliant, spectacular idea. Why hadn't he thought of this before? If he couldn't play a bigger part, he'd just have to make his part bigger. For instance, he could scream, no! That would get a reaction. Or he could bellow, no, then hit Joseph. I'm an angry innkeeper, thought Horrid Henry, and I hate guests coming to my inn. Certainly smelly ones like Joseph. Or he could shout, no, hit Joseph, then rob him. I'm a robber innkeeper, thought Henry. Or I'm a robber pretending to be an innkeeper. That would liven up the play a bit. Maybe he could be a French robber innkeeper, shout, no, and rob Mary and Joseph. Or he was a French robber pirate innkeeper, so he could shout, "No, tie Mary and Joseph up and make them walk the plank." Horrid Henry thought. Maybe my part won't be so small. After all, the innkeeper was the most important character. Well, rehearsals had been going on forever. Horrid Henry spent most of his time slumping in a chair. He'd never seen such a boring play. Well, naturally, he'd done everything he could to improve it. "Can't I add a dance?" asked Henry. "No," snapped Miss Battleaxe. "Can't I add a teeny-weeny little song?" Henry pleaded. "No," said Miss Battleaxe. "But how does the innkeeper know there's no room?" said Henry. "I think I should." Miss Battleaxe glared at him with her red eyes. "One more word from you, Henry, and you'll change places with Linda," snapped Miss Battleaxe. "Blades of grass, let's try again." Eek! An innkeeper with one word was definitely better than being invisible as the hind legs of a donkey. Still, it was so unfair. He was only trying to help. Well, at long last, showtime. Now the waiting and the rehearsing were over. Everyone lined up on stage behind the curtain. Peter and Margaret waited on the side to make their big entrance as Mary and Joseph. "Isn't it exciting, Henry, being in a real play?" whispered Peter. "No," snarled Henry. "Places, everyone, for the opening song," hissed Miss Battleaxe. "Now, remember, don't worry if you make a little mistake. Just carry on and no one will notice." "But I still think I should have an argument with Mary and Joseph about whether there's room," said Henry. "Shouldn't I at least check to see?" "No," snapped Miss Battleaxe, glaring at him. "If I hear another peep from you, Henry, you will sit behind the bales of hay and Jim will play your part." "Blades of grass, line up with the donkeys. Sheep, get ready to baa." "Oh, Bert, are you a sheep or a blade of grass?" Mr. Oddbod went to the front of the stage. "Welcome, everyone, mums and dads, boys and girls, to our new Christmas play, a little different from previous years. We hope you all enjoy a brand new show." Miss Battleaxe started the CD player. The music pealed, the curtain rose, the audience stamped and cheered, stars twinkled, cows mooed, horses neighed, and sheep baaed. Cameras flashed. Horrid Henry stood in the wings. He still hadn't decided for sure how he was going to play his part. Well, there were so many possibilities. It was so hard to choose. Finally, Henry's big moment arrived. He strode across the stage and waited behind the closed-in door for Mary and Joseph. And finally, he heard knock, knock, knock. The innkeeper stepped forward and opened the door. There was moody Margaret simpering away as Mary, and perfect Peter looking full of himself as Joseph. "Is there any room at the inn?" asked Joseph. Good question, thought Horrid Henry. His mind was blank. He thought of so many great things he could say that what he was supposed to say had just gone straight out of his head. "Is there any room at the inn?" repeated Joseph loudly. "Yes," said the innkeeper, "come on in." Joseph looked at Mary. Mary looked at Joseph. The audience murmured. Oops, thought Horrid Henry. Now he remembered he'd been supposed to say no. Oh well, in for a penny, in for a pound. The innkeeper grabbed Mary and Joseph's sleeves and yanked them through the door. "Come on in, I haven't got all day." But the inn's full," said Mary. "No, it isn't," said the innkeeper. "Is too. Is not. It's my inn and I should know. This is the best inn in Bethlehem. We've got TVs and beds and—" The innkeeper paused for a moment. What did inns have in them? "And Wi-Fi." Mary glared at the innkeeper. The innkeeper glared at Mary. Miss Battleaxe gestured frantically from the wings. This inn looks full to me, said Mary firmly. Come on, Joseph, let's go to the stable. Oh, don't go there. You'll get fleas, said the innkeeper. So, said Mary. I love fleas, said Joseph weakly, and it's full of manure. So are you, snapped Mary. Don't be horrid, Mary, said the innkeeper. Now sit down and rest your weary bones, and I'll sing you a song. Oh, moaned Mary, I'm having the baby. Can't you wait till I've finished my song? Snapped the innkeeper. No, bellowed Mary. Miss Battleaxe drew her hand across her throat. Henry ignored her. After all, the show must go on. Come on, Joseph, interrupted Mary. We're going to the stable. Okay, said Joseph. Well, you're making a big mistake, said the innkeeper. Miss Battleaxe ran on stage and nabbed him. Thank you, innkeeper. Your other guests need you now, said Miss Battleaxe, grabbing him by the collar. Merry Christmas, shrieked Horrid Henry as she yanked him off stage. There was a long silence. Mom and Dad weren't sure what to do. Should they clap or run away to a place where no one knew them? Mom clapped. Dad hid his face in his hands. Do you think anyone noticed? Whispered Mom. Dad looked at Mr. Oddbod's grim face. He sank down in his chair. Maybe one day he would learn how to make himself invisible. But what was I supposed to do? Said Horrid Henry afterwards in Mr. Oddbod's office. It's not my fault I forgot my line. Miss Battleaxe said not to worry if we made a mistake and just to carry on. Could he help it if a star was born? And in the words of Horrid Henry himself, Merry Christmas.
We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thank you. And I'd like our group to come back for a bow. So please turn your videos on and you can take a bow. Thank you all. Thank you to Carol Davenport, to Megan Davenport, to Mark Miller, Tika Finley, Jerry Finley, Ray Dudley, Paul Barton, and Kate Collins. And thanks especially to you, our audience, and our sponsor, Kennebunk Savings Point. And you will be sent a survey. So please, when you get a chance, take the survey and let us know how you feel and what we can do to make this even better. Thank you all, and good night.